To start with the biggest news, I should say, in the NBA right now, and that's what's going on with Zach LaVine. According to the first report of Shams Charania at The Athletic, Casey Johnson from NBC Sports Chicago has now kind of confirmed this as well. The Bulls and LaVine are both open to LaVine being traded. The Bulls are obviously in a very bizarre space out there. They're just not winning a lot of games. They're at a weird pressure point of the organization. LaVine would be the big domino, Brendon, to me, that they're perhaps signaling a rebuild here. And I think the place to start with this is just that the price for LaVine is going to be really fascinating. He has 4 years, $178 million left on his contract. It's so 3 years and change there. Player option in the final season. Here are the salary numbers he has, including what he's making this season. $40.06 million this year, $43 million next year, $45.999 the year after that, which just basically $46 million. And then in 26-27, a player option year, his age 31 season, $48.9 million. A lot of money for Zach LaVine, but a player, Brendon, that I think could have some value on the trade market. The question is this, to me. It's a lot of money for a guy that has injury issues, and I don't think we think of as like a guaranteed all-star unit out. I don't think we think of as an all-NBA guy, but a good scoring basketball player. What is the price the Bulls need to actually move on from him and reset some things here and go on a new path? And what should another team realistically give? What is the middle ground there where maybe he can actually get dealt? And it also seems like, based on that reporting, that maybe it's not just going to be highest bidder. Is it going to be a little bit of he's getting to dictate where he goes a little bit, and then how does that impact the market? There's just so much we don't know yet and a lot still to happen, but I think there's a lot to unpack about what his value and what his market's actually going to be as we're kind of speculating about it here.
So I have actually a few teams that I like him on.
I have one I love. One of our favorites, in fact. One of our planning the flag teams.
Both of our waving the flag teams are going to be in my list of considerations. We'll talk about them both. But I want to go back in time a little bit first to just 18 months ago when two things happened. One is that Zach LaVine underwent arthroscopic knee surgery on his left knee in May of last year, 2022. Coincidentally, by the surgeon who did the Aaron Rodgers Achilles surgery, who's getting a lot of attention right now. Just kind of a funny name to see as I pulled up the ESPN article about that surgery. LaVine also, of course, had the surgery in 2017, the original ACL tear that he dealt with. And then less than 2 months later, Zach LaVine returns to the Chicago Bulls for 5 years and $215 million. Now, 1 year of that contract is over. There's a player option at the end of it. I think he'll probably go ahead and play off that player option, would be my guess, Chris. I don't think you're looking at he's going to decline $49 million. The Chicago Bulls did not need to sign Zach LaVine to that contract. And it was a lot of money, a lot of years, and an aggressive commitment to what they had been doing even at that time. This is not one of those where now that he's on the trade block or, they've started the year, I think they're 4-7 this season, that we're just going back and saying, egg on your face, that's so embarrassing, awful decision, in hindsight. It was unnecessary and a mistake in that very moment. And I know this is nothing new about the Chicago Bulls, but it is just such a clear example, especially now that they are illustrating how much of a mistake it was in their own minds, of how much operating as a sports owner, as an executive, from a position of paranoia and embarrassment and trying to avoid embarrassment is the number one surefire way to never win anything and alienate the living hell out of your fans. Like, the concern for being a 25-win team in order to chase being a 35-win team is the worst possible thing you could do. This is exactly what we all became aware of with the treadmill of mediocrity thing. It's not that you can never have a mediocre season. It's that you can't lack direction. And the Bulls deciding to give a dude who was injured, who has never been a two-way player, and who has had a couple of great years, but, is a flawed guy. That much money at that point in time, it locked them into exactly what we're seeing now. So I just wanted to say that because this was it's like a train in the night and it's coming at you and you just lay down on the tracks and wonder if what's going to happen.
I think everything the Bulls are going through right now is really like a culmination, Brendon, of the decisions they've been making for almost a decade now, at least since 2016-17, right? The Jimmy Butler
pretty much
trade.
since what? Derrick Rose tore his ACL, you could even say? The Jimmy Butler trade, of course. Sure.
Yeah, the Butler trade is the big sliding doors moment, but there's another one in this, and they've had two decisions on Zach LaVine contracts. One is obviously what you said, and I agree with you. You didn't have to be the team that paid him this. I don't know if he was going to get this elsewhere. I think teams, we're kind of in an era, Brendon, where it feels like teams are like a little scared of the optics of playing negotiation hardball. Like, I feel like we're just kind of in the era where like guys get their money, and that's maybe a conversation for another day. But I kind of feel like we're in an era where maybe teams should be okay sometimes, like trying to get a better deal for themselves at times than just saying,
we played this game before, right? Chicago was the number one seed in the East up until about the trade deadline of that season prior to them giving him the contract. But you can't be married to that moment in time once the circumstances change.
No, and you also just have to think about like the well-being of your team to build a roster. You can't just give out the money and just be like, oh, that it's an optics when you have to actually there's real cap space and roster building issues you give yourself, and Zach LaVine is getting over a quarter of your salary cap, right? That's just the reality. As talented as he is, there's limitations there. He's also someone that, like, in 2018 they matched an offer sheet for with the Kings.
With the team,
with the Sacramento Kings. That was $80 million, was 20 a year. I get why you just matched that. That's in today's money, that's like that's not that much. It's how far we've come. But like,
Keldon Johnson money.
That's Keldon Johnson money. That's Olympic gold medalist money, my guy. But we're in a world where you have to, I think, look at this and wonder, okay, at some point they just had to, I think, pick a path to, I think, actually go through some pain. Maybe that was a moment. I think the contract is a moment. This feels like another one of those moments involving LaVine where you should they have to maybe look at themselves in the mirror and say, it's time to do a full-scale rebuild. If I were them, Brendon, if I'm the Bulls, it's time, I think, to actually pull the plug on this. It's time to go through some kind of rebuild here. I think it means LaVine. I think it means getting as much as you can for Caruso, who I think is going to have a ton of value on the market and should command like real offers from teams trying to win titles this year. We'll see about DeRozan's market in a different way. It doesn't seem like he's as on the market as of yet. But I think it's time for them to really look at themselves in the mirror and say it's time to actually change what is going on here. I think they've had opportunities before and have held the path, as you've said. They've done that time after time after time and in so many different ways for a long time now. I think now's the time they actually have to look at a full-scale teardown or readjustment here to actually get somewhere new. That's what it feels like to me.
Well, and the fact that it's LaVine specifically whose name is coming up first tells me that it's inevitable that everybody will be considered. And if you read the kind of tea leaves of what people are putting out there on Twitter and everything else about the direction this might go, it seems like that's in the offing already. I think DeRozan is on an expiring contract. They needed to trade him. We talked about that in the preview. Caruso, I think, is somebody who, like, I think you're talking about how many first-round picks could they potentially pry. If we're coming off of a trade deadline where Bojan Bogdanovic stayed in Detroit because the team wanted, Bojan Bogdanovic stayed in Detroit because the Pistons wanted 2 first-round picks for him. Caruso on an $8 million, $9 million contract is
partially
guaranteed
stupid
to not explore that.
Partially guaranteed for next year, which is just
glad they carved that out in case they didn't want Alex Caruso on their team. So yeah, look, if it's LaVine coming up first, that means everybody's on available. I wonder in terms of the value that they might get back for LaVine, Chris. How much better or worse do you think that Zach LaVine is than Bradley Beal? Because I've always thought of them as somewhat similar in terms of now that LaVine is on this contract, overpaid, kind of mostly one-way players that you're going to worry about on defense. But obviously Beal probably better than him. So how much worse is LaVine than Beal to you? 5, 10, 20%?
It's not. It's like 5%. It's not that much, and he's younger.
He is younger.
Like
making slightly less too. Even though it's a lot.
Making slightly less. Is a little bit younger. I think has an athleticism concern that I kind of feel like Beal might age in a really cool way that like I think LaVine, what that looks like is more of a question to me, just in terms of their style of play and what they're really good at. But LaVine is going to be in a situation where I think he can be like slot in as like a really well-paid third guy on a good team, and you could be like, sure. Or like he's like the really well-paid older guy on an up-and-coming team, hint for one of our picks here for a place I'd like to see him go, that where it can make a ton of sense. I think it's about infrastructure from him. I think there's some it has to be the right fit. He's a very fit-dependent guy to me, but I think there's a lot of reason to be, okay, maybe you get him to a place that isn't Chicago and things could just work out better for him.
See, this is interesting. I think you might be a little higher on LaVine than me, because
could he be a third guy on a great team, like on a good team? I think the answer is yes. That's where my head goes. I don't think I'm higher on him than that.
I think to your point on fit, it's exactly that. I think he could be the third best player on some championship caliber teams, one of which is going to come up for me. But I think if you're saying, is he the third best player on like Philadelphia, as an example of a team that I think has already come up because people had circled LaVine after the Harden trade as a guy they might want to pursue before Maxey blew up and their season started so well. Dallas, I don't, so it depends on where, but sure, I think he could be. But for comparison's sake here, to return to the Beal comparison, the Wizards got for sending for sending Beal to Phoenix, the Wizards got Chris Paul's salary, Landry Shamet's salary. He's playing, but he's mostly a salary. 6 second-round picks and 4 first-round pick swaps. So if we just call Chris Paul and Landry Shamet, well, Chris Paul wasn't salary. They flipped him for something. So however you want to value that all out, that's a pretty significant haul. If the Bulls got even 75% of that, I feel like they'd be pretty pleased. So how much can they get? Because I do also think giving him that contract rather than maybe trading him at the 2022 deadline or something is part of why now you might get a little less for him. So what do you think they can get?
This is the part I have the hardest time, and I am bad at. I think I am bad at fake trades. I want to just couch myself what I'm about to say.
Yeah, I don't think we need to build a whole fake trade out necessarily because that is messy.
I also just feel like I'm always like, I feel like I'm either like way off on what the picks are ultimately. Like, I don't know. I look at just.
Well, that's why I'm using the Beal thing. Is it how much less than that? If we agree he's a little worse, maybe we differ on how much, but pick swaps are a little hard to value, but is it a player better or worse than Chris Paul? Is it more draft capital or less draft capital than Washington got? Those are sort of, I think, where we can maybe go instead of trying to map it out.
Here's what I would say. I think similar draft capital, like pretty much, I think that's the right ballpark. And I think player-wise, I think that's where it could look different. If we're going to kind of look at destinations a little bit, and I kind of need to do that to kind of say what I'm going to say. Yeah. I look at Orlando as a team that I really like a fit for him. It's not going to be Anthony Black. It shouldn't be Anthony Black. But could they be the team that like rolls the dice on a Jalen Suggs rehabilitation? Are they a team that is like we'll take a roll on Fultz for whatever reason? Like, is it Cole Anthony? Do they just say, like, hey, we'll take the scoring guy, he can get buckets for us, whatever? Can they just get one of that caliber of young guy and just some draft capital and say, okay, we cleared our books, we're gonna go in on youth, we're just clearing our deck here? Is that to me is kind of the path of what I'm looking for there.
Yeah, the books and the length of the salaries is a huge part of this. And it was huge for why I think Washington was able to get so much from Phoenix. One, Phoenix was just desperate, but they needed to get off the Chris Paul thing. They needed to move on from Chris Paul in a way that helped their team rather than just having to cut him. And I think similarly, Washington wanted to clear long-term salary. So they weren't going to take back, I don't know where else Beal could have gone, like Duncan Robinson in Miami, right? They wouldn't have wanted him or Tyler Hero to be returning. So that's part of why the Suns deal ultimately worked out, where Chris Paul, who was on an expiring and then ended up getting flipped, could be moved. So yeah, maybe a couple first-round picks and some big salaried players. That feels like the ballpark of what we're talking about. Maybe some seconds in there as well is probably what Chicago's going to get. But that pretty much means everybody's in the game. You know, there's nobody really priced out there. I mean, maybe the Bucks or the Celtics or the Suns who don't want him probably couldn't pursue him, but the Clippers, you know, these teams who aren't going to make the trade. But everybody who wants him can probably get Zach LaVine. So, yeah, let's focus on the Magic maybe, because I think the question there is this the best use of your spending? Because I believe Franz is extension eligible after this year, and his contract would kick in the summer, of 2026, which would be the last year of LaVine's contract. It maps out well. You're spending on LaVine now while Paolo and Franz age up. He would provide some structure and stability to your late game offense, where maybe he's not the only guy that gets to have the ball, because I think Franz and Paolo have earned that, but he's certainly a better spacing option, if nothing else, than what they have. And you're rolling with some growing pains that are a little smaller. You pair him with Suggs or Fultz or whoever's left over there, and a switchable big defensive front line, and maybe that insulates him a little bit better than Nikola Vucevic and Patrick Beverley playing the 4 we're doing in Chicago. I don't hate that fit. I think it is more a matter of Orlando, and it goes back to what we were talking about the other day when we talked about them in our weekly check-in, is do they feel like the time is now? But I think if you're looking for structure for LaVine, that's pretty damn good.
Franz, it's a real testament to, I think, what we think of Franz as well, just because Franz would cover him so well as a creator. Franz could be the playmaker for others as much as we're enticed by his scoring potential and all that stuff. I think pairing him with someone like Franz to handle some of the playmaking burden, and then maybe Anthony Black grows into a bigger role and all this stuff, and it's like, okay, like Zach LaVine can just be the buckets guy, and that's like
you have to feel good about Black, I think.
Yes,
to do any trade for a scorer like Orlando needs to do. And you need to feel good about Anthony Black kind of right now, because if you're telling me that, one of Fultz and Suggs goes out in that deal, or even a Gary Harris or a Joe Ingles goes out in that deal, it's like, okay, well, somebody has to still play. And we need a future plan here at the backcourt that isn't just Zach LaVine. So, yeah, it would be a big bet on Black, I think.
What are some other markets that you like for LaVine?
Lakers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has to come up. I think they need a little bit more juice. They're always going to be star hunting. There's been the third star kind of like, I know that some of the stuff was taken out of context from what was said, but I think there's always just going to be speculation about them making that kind of move. I think finding that trade is a little... What exactly that trade is to me is interesting. I mean, is it just it's the one pick and then it's like Russell and matching salary, I guess, is all you really need?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you throw a lot of seconds in there and try to get up to as close to whatever the bidding war value ends up mapping out to be. But, yeah, it's Russell and probably Hachimura, or, yeah, I guess it sort of has to be. And
I'm looking at
the
their
future
cap sheets now.
The future unprotected first, probably. Maybe you could even protect it. I don't know. And then seconds. And that kind of gets you where you need to be. There might need to be actually a little more salary that goes in, but Taurean Prince or Hood Schifino, I mean, he's a first-round pick. Jared Vanderbilt. There's ways to get there. They have salaries. So, yeah, I think...
Is sacrificing some of that forward depth worth it for Zach LaVine, I guess my question. Like, you're remaking if you're going to say, like, hey, Ruby, bye. Torian Prince, goodbye. Or Jared Vanderbilt, goodbye. And plus Russell. Is that worth the sacrifice for the Lakers? Like, to me, that's like a very fair question because you're remaking what you are if you're going to do that.
I personally think that it is, but I think Darvin Ham might not, but it's also not up to Darvin Ham. They want to be big and play defense-first basketball, but I think their half-court offense, their shot creation is just not what it needs to be to win a championship. And so, to me, D'Angelo Russell, going from him to LaVine would be an improvement, and I think that would get them more into the range. I also had the Kings, which I alluded to. There's not an awesome trade here, which is sort of the problem. Sacramento also already has Malik Monk and De'Aaron Fox, and so if you're telling me that you're now adding LaVine into that also, I think it's a pretty big risk. It would probably be like Barnes and Herter to get there. It's not great, but they've been interested in the past, and they're not going to necessarily get a free agent. So, a move like that I think makes sense. I'll throw a couple more at you. Brooklyn, for obvious reasons. The Ben Simmons contract potentially could be involved there. There's a lot of these teams where it's just who decides now is the time to pull the trigger. The Lakers and the Nets, I think, are both like that. We talked about it with Orlando from a different standpoint. Last one that I had was Charlotte.
Yeah.
For a very specific reason. I know that would be a lot of offense. I know that you have the Brandon Miller developmental block that you want. Maybe he goes to the 3 at long term, and it's kind of LaMelo, LaVine, Miller, PJ Washington, Mark Williams is maybe kind of your 5 core there. But for one specific reason, I think that makes sense. Gordon Hayward is on a $32 million expiring contract. The Charlotte Hornets are probably not going to be getting somebody great in free agency, and with new ownership, they might not try to the way that they did with Hayward or Rozier or some of these other players in the past. So, if you want to kind of flip that salary down the line, turning Hayward plus one of your, maybe one of your young players into Zach LaVine, who then is on your books longer, provides you some insulation and stability at the veteran kind of scoring spot, I could see that even if a LaMelo LaVine backcourt makes me nervous defensively. Steve Clifford would have heart palpitations, I think.
He would have health concerns again.
Yeah.
2 others for me. Sacramento. I just think, maybe...
I said Sacramento.
Oh, sorry. I just blacked out for a second. Apparently. My brain just right now is goop. So I like the Sacramento one. The other one that I think is worth just considering, but I don't know if I really like it once I've thought about it, is the Miami Heat.
Make the case.
Better than Hero. Gives them a bigger ball handler that I think they could ride in the playoffs. It's a star guy. It's a win-now piece for your Jimmy era. I think Jimmy and LaVine could really complement each other. Funny how that goes, that they could work together. Shocker. Obviously, I know there's trades. They're traded for each other and all that stuff, but it's just funny that I think there is some meshing there. It could help you eat innings. I think LaVine is a guy that would probably benefit from getting into that kind of environment and raising his game. And if you're looking at Miami and you're saying, okay, we want to make an improvement, but we also don't want to totally put all of our chips in. If there's something else down the line we might want to do, this is a way to kind of get better, I think, and be aggressive now, but not. You still have some powder dry if you need to, in a year, call Cleveland and be like, hey, are you panicking about Donovan Mitchell? Well, how about LaVine for Mitchell or something like that? You have flexibility even if you do this.
I get that part. I do agree that it keeps the powder dry. Miami is just, unfortunately, a wee bit cheap.
Yes.
And so if you're making the case to Mickey Harrison, hey, we're going to pay the tax this year, and he goes, okay, great, for who? And then your answer is Zach LaVine, I don't know if he signs off on that. But it definitely wouldn't cost as much as Mitchell or Beal or Lillard would have, and it does still fill a need for them. I just think the theory of, and then you flip him, is where I maybe run into some issues. And I think you maybe get stuck with, you're paying a lot for Lillard or for LaVine at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and your team becomes very expensive for a guy who isn't probably really going to be the final definite answer for taking you to the next level.
How do you feel about New Orleans as one last one? I don't
really like it. I mean, it has to
Okay.
be McCollum probably, and I just think CJ is probably a more valuable player.
Yeah, I agree.
It'd probably be Chicago trading for McCollum would be the better way to put that type of a package. I
Yeah.
mean, really,
Yeah. The last thing I'll say here is I think I'm going to be proven right that Caruso is going to be could be the most impactful guy dealt at the deadline, just based on the early James Harden returns, and B that Alex Caruso is going to go somewhere and like make a team a lot better.